regret the tweet, Gary?
Do you fear getting suspended?
No, I'm only mate. How you doing? Yes. Anything about the tweet, Gary? Sorry, what about it? Sending the tweet at all? No.
Do you stand by what you said?
Sorry?
Do you stand by what you said in your tweet?
Of course.
Nice house. Do you stand by what you said? And he said, of course.
In the back of his nice posh BBC car, which no doubt we're paying for. Cara, what do you think?
Do you know what? He shouldn't have done that, actually. You could tell he was thinking about whether or not he should do it, say, of course.
He had plenty of time to think about it.
He had plenty of time.
His house for hours.
And he did it, which shows how arrogant he actually is. But, do you know, I don't know about you guys, but it feels different to me this time, this one. Does it feel different? I don't know. And maybe just in the past 24 hours it's got different. And it's because that he brought Nazism into it. And it will serve him right. But, you know, for all he's putting on a show there, this is a bigger deal than anything he's ever said before. And I suspect, I hope the BBC act on this. They've got impetus now. They've got the public behind them. So, I mean, I hope they act on it. He will get a job somewhere else, but, you know...
And, of course, Sam, we heard the culture secretary, Lucy Fraser, in the Commons today. She was primed. Former Culture Secretary John Whittetell asking her a question, and she answered it beautifully and elegantly, bringing in her own Jewish heritage.
Yeah, absolutely. And you will expect there will be a briefing going on now with lobby journalists and Number 10 officials, and you will expect them to be asking Number 10, what does the Prime Minister think about this? You know, this is an issue that is not going to go away, and politics is being dragged into it.
Here's the thing, though, Sam, if you think about it, if they do sack him, is this the anti-free speech government?
Well, see, I think the BBC is a special case because we pay for it whether we like it or not. We have no choice. We can switch it on and off, but we can't choose not to pay for it if we don't agree with it. Now, nobody has to pay for GBNews. Nobody has to pay for Sky and the other broadcasters. We have to pay for the BBC. And so I think if you sign up to work for the BBC, you have to abide by their rules. And their rules are we are for everybody, and therefore we don't express personal opinions.
Yeah, it's the irony, though, isn't it, Carol, that for people like me, I might not agree with the content of what he says, and I think the comparison, you never compare anything to the Nazis, it's ridiculous, but I would defend his right to tell us what he thinks. When people tell you what they think, you can work out who they are. You get to know who they are when they're honest with you. I don't like a culture in which people aren't allowed to say what they think.
No, I think what Sam says is exactly right. I think if you worked for any independent broadcaster where the rules are, say what you like. And with someone like Lineker, he would be employed by an independent broadcaster because of his views. And so he's quite entitled then to expand them. But I think in this situation where, you know, how much is the licence?
£156.
When you're paying 156 quid a year.
£59.
And a lot of the people who will be the most offended, I think, are older people, and they're the people who can least afford the licence. So I think you have to abide by the rules. It's no his tweet the other day when he said, "Oh, I see the free speech agents are at me again today." But it's not about free speech. It's about rules. It's about impartiality rules. The BBC have their licence, and one of the conditions of that licence is that they are scrupulously impartial.
And do you think that has to apply even if you're not a political presenter or reporter?
Completely. I mean, he's got out of it in the past because his bosses have excused him by saying that he's not in news and he is not staff. But the fact of the matter is, when he paid £1.3 million a year, you are representative of that company and that organisation. And he is. And if the people who work for the BBC, even the freelancers, if they have to abide by those rules, Gary Lineker should. And there's rumblings now, and I think it might be in your paper, Piers, today, that the staff in the BBC are getting sick of it now. Yeah. They're saying, if we have to stick by these rules, why can't he?
Jonathan Agnew, who's a cricket commentator, not my world, cricket or football, as you know, Malone, but he said if he'd said it, he'd have been fired because he's a much smaller fish in the BBC ocean.
And if you look at a lot of the tweets that have been listed in all the papers today, that where other commentators who work for the BBC have actually said to him, pack it in, because you're making this hard for all of us. And what I think was really interesting there was his face when he got into that car. He is entirely... what's the word? He's been arrogant about it. He's not contrite. He's not saying, if I have upset people with those quotes about the Nazis, then I'm sorry about that, but my belief is that these laws are wrong. He could qualify it.
He thinks different rules apply to him.
Completely. And he goes, Piers, he's got every right to think that. Because
he's got away with it 9 times
Because he's got away with it 9, 10 times before. And a lot over the past 2 years, I think, since 2021 till now. And his bosses have let him see that he is totally invincible. So I think they have to show that he's not.
Do you think the PM will get involved, Sam? sources close to the Prime Minister will we read in the papers
Yeah,
tomorrow?
absolutely. I think there will be certainly comments coming from Downing Street because they will be asked about this. And I think the next time, you know, Rishi Sunak, he's out tomorrow in France at a summit, but you could imagine that the press pack going with him will just chuck a question in about this if it's still rumbling on tomorrow. It is that sort of question. And once the Prime Minister's making these comments, you know, the BBC bosses, they're in a difficult position, you know.
And the Culture Secretary would have cleared those remarks with number 10, surely, because that was a rehearsed answer.
It really
wasn't
was,
spontaneous.
No.
Very good answer, by the way.
But I do feel a wonder. Gary Lineker seems to be almost engaging, he's leaning into this fight, and you wonder if that's to kind of keep himself relevant, keep himself in the news. He almost seems to be kind of taking this on as a big way to kind of keep his public profile.
Do you not think it's arrogance, Sam, though? Do you not think he feels that he can't back down now? He has to be... He has said to everyone, I will continue to talk to the people who have no voice. And it would make him look, I don't know, in his head, maybe he thinks it's going to make him look weak and a bit silly and a bit non-committed.
Well, if they sack him, he's then the victim. Sack him, he's the victim, and then he will play that as well. We live in a country where you cannot say anything against the government or you get sacked from the state broadcaster. That's the other way it'll play out.
But it is because it is the state broadcaster. Look, there's a Conservative MP, Andrew Bridgen, who's had the whip removed from him. He can no longer stand as a Tory MP at the next general election because he compared something to the Holocaust and it was described as deeply offensive. This man has described a very serious government policy, which I would argue the most of the country agrees with.
Behind, I completely agree.
Polls are suggesting that. And he said it's like being in Germany in the 1930s when Hitler's government was already deporting Jewish people and was preparing the final solution, which 6 million Jews were killed.
And you know what he said? If he understood politics properly, Lineker, never mind history and the Holocaust, if he understood politics properly, he would understand that this is a good policy. He lives in an echo chamber where this celebrity, liberal, elitist echo chamber where everyone thinks like him. And that's not how ordinary people think. That's not how people in the communities in this country think. And we've had films on here on GBNews this week of going into small communities where 250, 300 young men are dumped on these communities, and people are anxious, and they have every reason to be anxious. They're not racist, they don't hate immigrants, they're just anxious, and they have every right to be, and their voices are being taken away by the likes of Gary Lineker.
There's a great piece in my paper, Stephen Pollard, former editor of the Jewish Chronicle, speaking for the Jewish community, saying he's outraged and offended, and he lost... Some of his family were killed in the concentration camps.
And that's it. They are deeply offensive comments. I do agree with Bev, actually, that you have the right in this country to say what you want to say, and I do believe in that. But actually, if you are speaking on behalf of the BBC or you are a representative of the BBC, then, you know, you have to expect some backlash for that.
Yeah, you have your right to say, but you could also have the right to lose your job over it.
It kind of depends what his contract says as well. If his BBC contract is that he's free to say what he wants, then he is free to say what he wants. He needs to abide by his contract.
BBC have got enough taxpayers' money, billions of our money, to say to that rip that contract up and fire him.
But I think that if you said he's sticking to his contract to the public, they'd say we don't care about his contract. This is deeply offensive, and this is, you know, it feels like he's crossed a line this time. The rest of the times we knew nothing was going to happen. Now I'm not so sure. Now this feels different.
But I also wonder why, you know, if he'd been actually being supportive of this policy, if he'd been going out to bat for Suella Braverman, saying this is a great policy, would the BBC bosses be defending him, or would he be out?
That's a very good point.
And I suspect he would have been out.
If he'd backed it. Because some people are arguing, Amnesty have said it shows the country in its worst ever light. United Nations has criticised it. The usual suspects, in my view, have criticised it. Yes, he might well have lost the job if he'd...
I think, you know, I think there is an element of it. They've put up with him speaking out for so long because it's almost... he's speaking on behalf of actually all the members of staff, or many members of staff in that organisation who do have a more liberal bent, according to Roger Mosley, one of our former bosses, who was on the airwaves this morning, saying that actually many people who work in the organisation do have a kind of more liberal bent. And obviously his views reflect that, and so I think perhaps if he'd gone the other way and was actually really cheering from the rafters for this policy, it might have been a bit of a different reaction.
That's the very reason, isn't it, why BBC employees have to remain impartial. You know, part of their contract doesn't matter what their politics are. They're not supposed to foist them on other people, and the BBC has fallen for that, as you say. You know, we're used to that now, but this just feels different.